week 3 as a new CIO. Unlike most new CIOs, I just switched industries with my last move, from banking to healthcare/insurance. In banking, where I spent 20 plus years, I took for granted that I understood the specific role of technology and how it creates value for that industry. In retrospect, I think I was wrong, way too heavily influenced by the functional bubbles I'd grown up in. And that becomes crystal clear when you have to start from scratch in a new industry. In my new world, which is driven by tasks like claims adjudication, customer service, and functions like workflow and document management, the conventional role of technology is to automate and digitize. As with banking, healthcare tech creates value mostly by delivering efficiencies in ops, think back office. And in theory, by improving the customer experience, think digital portal. On the ops side, an example of the universal problem to solve is the need for a single pane of glass. So users don't have to juggle a dozen legacy apps simultaneously. And on the client side, the universal problem to solve is getting the client all their transactional data through digital channels instead of snail mail or call centers. The challenge with universal problems to solve is that they lack commercial imagination. That's why I think I got the question wrong about the role and value of tech while I was in banking. Because convention leans toward what everyone else is doing, minimizing the power of tech as a differentiator. The comparison most businesses make when they're thinking tech is peer relative. What are our competitors doing that we aren't? Good to know, but everyone has that mindset, including the leader in the space, ensuring that tech operates in a regressive, non-commercial bubble. That's an opportunity. I'm starting with the counterintuitive position that the primary role of technology and how it creates value for a company is to advantage top-line growth, not through some 6 degrees of separation exercise where you can rationalize any tech investment as eventually improving sales, but directly. Think about how hard that is. Outside of your CRM investments, which are mostly client note-taking apps, and your marketing platforms, which are multi-channel content management systems, how else is tech impacting top-line growth? Those are the questions I'm asking in month 1. Maybe we focus on sales automation, tools that streamline the sales process, better lead scoring systems, better sales analytics. You can see how I'm immediately falling into the path of convention. When all else fails, tech tries to make it, whatever it is, more efficient and effective. But how often do we focus that attention on prospecting and nurturing clients for sales, focusing on better closing efforts? That's a good start. Let's make that more efficient and effective. Or maybe we focus on better insights into customer behavior, preferences, and buying patterns. Use tech to tailor our sales strategy itself. Maybe we change our core offerings, whatever it takes to accelerate revenue growth, to drive sustainable growth. Tech has to become a business contributor beyond efficiency creation. Tech's success has to be measured by its commercial contributions, not just productivity, but performance. If you can't draw direct lines between your tech investments and revenue growth, you can do better. Day 11 reading list. 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel. I don't appreciate his politics, but he has a steel trap of a business brain. My guess is that most of the folks who read him religiously are inspired by his success. They're either sitting in a startup or aspire to send one. The people who really should be reading him are the ones in large, faceless enterprises. The folks who don't yet understand the value of embracing a monopolist top-line mindset. While conventional wisdom often warns against monopolies because of all the inequities that come with market dominance and the lack of competition, Thiel's whole thing is about aiming for monopoly, how it can drive innovation, efficiency, long-term growth. Second book is really a counterweight to any of the ick you get from Thiel. Read Abundance, The Future is Better Than You Think by Peter Diamandis and Stephen Kotler. The second book is just a reminder of how much better off we are today than in previous generations. The critical role that tech has played in getting us here and how likely it is that humanity is going to have a bright, bright future. Very likely, by the way, despite what you read in the news. And finally, if you're more of a podcast person, I'd listen to some sales specific channels. I'm not going to name any because they all try to sell you on their own like sales university or sales masterclass or some other nonsense. You can take the salesperson out of the sale, but whatever. Just ignore them. Listen to the sale podcasts though, not because you need to be a master salesperson, because they think differently than you do. And that empathetic exercise opens up all kinds of tech possibilities. That's it for day 11. During your honeymoon period, how often should you check in with your boss? Wrong question. Because one, you don't have a boss. You own the company you work for, not because you're a senior executive, but because that's the right mindset if you want to get stuff done. And two, that question is anchored in 200-year-old hierarchical thinking. It made sense when you rode a horse to work, but it's BS in the modern workplace. You don't have a boss. You have a multiverse of bosses. Your job is one of influence and service. The people to your left and to your right, your peers, are your bosses. The people who report to you are there to be served by you. They're your bosses, your clients, your bosses. Leadership demands that you reframe the check-in question. How can I best steward this company, my company? How can I best influence those I serve? How often can I be of service to those I serve? That depends on the size of the organization and how long it takes you to compile information worth sharing. Process what you're learning into questions, hard questions that can help those you serve improve their game and yours. For your external meetings, your check-in cadence depends on the number of clients you have and the state of their relationship with your company. Start with quarterly, and this is important. Don't just focus on clients with strained relationships, the escalations. They're important from a client retention standpoint. But if the only client engagements in your calendar are problem clients, that'll skew your tech strategy toward the past as opposed to the future. Your internal stakeholder meetings start with weekly check-ins and then transition to bi-weekly. Fight the urge to transition to monthly, because if you can get by with monthlies, you don't need the meeting. You need a quarterly lunch or something. Remember the mantra. You can't outsource relationships. Every CIO I've ever worked with assigns some of their direct reports to own key relationships. For instance, if the CIO had 10 peers, the head of business 1 through 5, the CFO, the head of risk, the head of ops, sales, some of those relationships were managed by the CIO's directs in my past experience at the CIO's behest. Usually this is done as a time management technique because the most effective people are the ones who narrow their focus to the most important challenges that the business faces. The thinking goes, if you can't be everything to everyone, ... But as effective as that might be, I'll say it again, you can't outsource relationships. If you're tempted to organize your directs to own some of your relationships, at least do one thing. Attend their weekly one-on-ones or monthly one-on-ones. Make it a 2-on-1. You and your direct and your peer. Why? Because your peers are smart. They know that you're narrowing your focus like they are. And they understand that your no-show is a prioritization set, that their priorities don't matter as much to you as their peers' priorities. And you and all your peers are judged by the business explicitly on your peer relative contribution. Well, implicitly, how do they judge you? On the strength of your relationships, the trust you garner. That larger dynamic always makes me think of a quote by President Johnson. Never tell a man to go to hell unless you can send him there. Day 12 reading list. Crucial Conversations by Carrie Patterson. Last week, I recommended that you read Stephen King's On Writing to improve your corporate communication skills. So here's the flip side. Read Carrie's corporate communications book to improve your fictional dialogue writing skills. While her book primarily focuses on real life communication, its principles can be applied to crafting compelling and authentic conversations between characters in novels, plays, whatever else tickles your creative fancy. Your executive need to better understand how to navigate high-stakes discussions, super serious, can lead to an artful, playful skill. Writing engaging, realistic dialogue that resonates with readers or viewers. Second book, Doris Kearns Goodwin's Team of Rivals, The Political Genius of Abraham Lincoln. It's a cool meditation on strategic leadership and coalition building. How should you navigate diverse perspectives at work? Why should you commit to inclusive decision-making? What can Abraham Lincoln teach you about conflict resolution? What can he teach you about strategic alliances? A surprising metric ton. And finally, if you're more of a podcast person, you're out of luck. I cringe when I listen to or read about how to build winning teams. They're just exercises in confirmation bias. That's why I love Doris's book. She's a historian, couldn't care less about business. I know, that's not very satisfying. So let's do that again. Take two. If you're more of a podcast person and you want to become a better leader, find a decent podcast about Buddhism or goat yoga and use that time to meditate on the power of kindness. If you find a good one, tell me about it. That's it for day 12. Budgeting is a 4-letter word. An unusually large amount of your time will go to monitoring and optimizing your budgets and expenses. CapEx, OpEx. That's normal, unfortunately, because budgets are tangible indicators of your priorities, your alignment with business objectives and strategies, and budgets are tangible indicators of your ability to execute, your performance. Budgeting is how seniors guide roadmaps, guide planning, guide decision-making. Senior management isn't what most juniors think it is. It's mostly an accounting job with a little relationship management thrown in, a little talent management, a little risk management, but mostly you're an accountant with a fiduciary responsibility for your company. You're monitoring your spending and ensuring that you're getting the most value out of all that investment: tech, ops, people, process, innovation. You're regularly reviewing and adjusting your budget because that's how you optimize. You'll hear the word transparency as a stakeholder demand, and what it mostly means is budget related. Are you spending the way you said, the way we all agreed? With a well-structured IT budget and continuous governance throughout the year, you have a real chance at financial transparency that demonstrates responsible management while showcasing the value that IT can bring to the table. Not just features and functions, but collaborative governance. Almost everyone budgets on an annual basis, and the exercise has little to nothing to do with money. It has everything to do with getting everyone on the same page. Are we all looking at the same North Star? Given that the business changes every day, are we all still aligned with the company's strategy and financial objectives? And do they align with everyone's day-to-day priorities? That's probably the most important thing. Does that sound like something you should do once a year? No. This is why when anyone asks me how tech can get more agile, I say step 1 is agile finance. We have to first address the limitations of traditional budgeting. We need quarterly responsiveness to real-time changes, because staying focused on what was agreed to last November does not help with next November or today. We need shorter planning cycles to allow for more frequent adjustments based on market conditions, business priorities, new client opportunities. If finance is more flexible, the business is more resilient, more cross-functional, more collaborative and transparent. It's even more inclusive because it encourages more regular input from all relevant stakeholders. And that fosters a sense of shared ownership and accountability, as everyone has a voice in the financial planning process, which is so much more than a financial planning process. Budgeting does not have to be a 4-letter word. It doesn't have to reinforce the traditional hierarchical structure. It can and should encourage a more decentralized decision-making process that empowers teams at all levels to take ownership of the company and how it runs every day. Day 13 reading list, The Innovator's Solution by Clayton Christensen. I'm actually surprised it took me 3 weeks to get to him. Now, this isn't his best known book, The Innovator's Dilemma, or his most useful book, The Innovator's Prescription, but he's smart enough to keep selling tickets to Innovationville, the business world's most elusive job to be done, what I call corporate Disneyland. I want to be mad at the guy for reusing his hook, but I've read almost everything he's done, and it was well written, fun to read, and it totally helps that he's cross-disciplinary and he uses familiar examples. He writes for regular people, not for his fellow professors. Read him, worth the time. Book 2, Deep Finance by Glenn Hopper. I should have recommended this last week when I was talking about how business transformation can't happen from the outside in. It needs to start in the business. Agile, for instance. As a CIO, you're at the intersection of technology and business strategy. Deep Finance tries to do the same as a CFO. It delves into how technology, analytics, data science are all key to finance operations, key to driving digital transformation, key to innovation. Glenn should partner with Clayton, book 1, because the title would be easy, The Innovator's Budget. And finally, if you're more of a podcast person, again, I'm sorry. I'd stay the heck away from any podcasts with the word money in the title, also the word financial. And it's for the same reasons I hate podcasts about how to improve sales. Every podcaster is in it to monetize people who lack self-confidence. And again, that wasn't satisfying. I got it. Listen to the audiobook of Moby Dick by Herman Melville. It's not just about obsession. It's about risk-taking and the pursuit of goals. It'll help you get into the mind of a CFO because it's a great parallel to managing financial risk. As I said yesterday, senior management is, rather unfortunately, mostly an accounting job, which is why you need to understand CapEx and OpEx. Shortest possible tutorial, CapEx, which is short for capital expenses, or investments in assets that provide long-term benefits. So think equipment, property, infrastructure. So CapEx is generally a one-time expense, but has a long-lasting impact on the company. So its treatment in accounting terms provides your CFO multi-year flexibility to hit financial expectations. OpEx, on the other hand, which is short for operating expenses, are recurring costs from regular daily operations. Think employee salaries, rent, utility bills, maintenance costs. OpEx for a given year is use it or lose it in terms of accounting flexibility. It's only useful from an accounting perspective in the year that it was spent. The other difference between CapEx and OpEx is that your company's governing body, usually your company's board, has much stricter oversight over CapEx. They treat your CapEx budget as flexible, not fixed, and definitely not always increasing. So you need to influence the board for increases in CapEx. And influence is always hard work. Going all OpEx will get you out of the gate quickly. Once you start making money, the expenses you incurred before you were flush won't be deductible in the future when you'll need those deductions. Once you move out of the garage, CapEx will be more valuable because it helps you keep more of the money that you're making. Think tax benefits to you and your investors. So how do CapEx and OpEx play into the first 30 days as a CIO? Your non-tech peers and your board understand the CapEx, OpEx distinction, but they might not understand its dynamic with software development. From the outside in, it'll always look like investments in software, especially big marquee programs, are once and done with minimal post-delivery, ongoing maintenance. That's, some small fixed amount. That's wrong. Software maintenance is necessarily a small snowball rolling down a snowy CapEx mountain that will need everyone's attention and focus to keep it manageable. You're going to need to educate your stakeholders to understand that the CapEx you invest in software will, over time, break into two buckets: run and change. Run the business, RTB, and change the business, CTB. The problem is that any software, post-delivery, that's actually being used will require more development, more run, RTB CapEx. Why? Because the use of software, static, in a business, dynamic, means new requirements will sneak into your CapEx spend as RTB, causing you to spend much less of your overall yearly CapEx on big marquee CT. If your stakeholders don't understand it, tech will look increasingly incompetent every year. So, as a new CIO, you need to help reframe the CapEx and OpEx discussions. They need to know that what's really happening is CapEx, that snowball, has a run cost, is running down a snowy mountain. Everyone, you, your stakeholders, your PMO, need to operate differently to better manage expectations, and as your org matures, to refocus everyone on how to reduce RTB as a recurring cost. Minor paradox, reducing RTB spend is CTB at the structural level. Day 14 reading list. You're going to have to Google today's topic because no one's crazy enough to write an entire book on CapEx and OpEx. So Google those two words and read the entire article on Investopedia. If you'd rather watch something on the significance of financial statements, one of my hour-long walks on YouTube is called How to Read and Understand Earnings Reports. Here's the scariest part. That's not even the most boring hour recorded on YouTube. You're welcome. What else can you read? If you have kids in high school, borrow their copy of The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, or the Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas. Gatsby can be a reflection on financial ethics, wealth accumulation, and the impact of materialism on society. And despite what they teach you in high school, the Count of Monte Cristo is about strategic planning and resource allocation, and all the themes that will make you thrive in corporate America: revenge, resilience, sneaky maneuver. Turn that one around. That's it for day 14. If the people in your company aren't sharing news articles every day, along with their commentary on those articles about your industry, your clients, your competitors, and all the emerging technologies that could drive innovation, keep your company competitive, then one of two things is broken. Either the expectation is everyone is already doing it on their own, which is a little problematic for all the reasons that we tend to value diversity and inclusion, because not everyone comes to the same conclusion given the same input. And those who process differently tend to better represent the art of the possible. So either the expectation is that everyone's doing it on their own, or there's no expectation in your culture to be continuously learning from the outside, from one another, continuously exploring, engaging, growing. In my experience, cultures like that become fixated exclusively on project and program reporting, statuses, rags. This project is amber, that project is red, this culture is not doing. And to be fair, in most companies, culture happens at the team level. So it's super easy to evaluate if you and your team are succeeding on this front. Just count up all the threads, emails, Slacks, text over the last couple of weeks where you or someone on your team shared some external news. For extra credit, count how many times that sharing led to a real conversation beyond like a thumbs up. Why? Because that behavior is helping demonstrate the power of diversity, the value of a culture of continuous learning and engagement. It's letting new perspectives rise to the surface. Like with the SDLC, the software development lifecycle, which we talked about last week, each team in your org will be on a spectrum. In this case, from passive to active learning, from intermittent to continuous learning. And as with SDLC, there is no single solution that will mature every practice. You need a case-by-case-by-case runbook. Let's start with the most positive case. If a team is already sharing external news organically, regularly, awesome. Arm them with a great curation tool like Context Mobile out of Singapore. It's a mobile app that lets your team curate the news for each other, helps them build shared reading lists when they find the time. That's just adding structure to healthy behavior. If the team is like mid-range sharing, sometimes sharing, then start real conversations on the articles that they're sharing. Don't just thumbs up and reply with interesting. Thanks for sharing. Create social capital around that behavior through positive reinforcement. Your reply should demonstrate that you read it and that it helped you connect some dots. Share what those dots are, even if they seem obvious to you, because not everyone comes from the same, background, comes to the same conclusions, given the same input. You might be the diversity, the value in this thread. If the team is challenged on the sharing front, that's that final kind of piece of the spectrum, well, be the change that you wish to see in the world. You can't mandate a growth mindset. You can't teach a growth mindset in a classroom. The best you can do is to model the behavior yourself as a leader. Share articles worth reading. If someone replies with any hint that they've read it, engage them and thank them, not just for sharing, but for championing diversity and continuous learning. Day 15 reading list. It's going to be a hard one today because it's like the movie Inception, a dream within a dream within a dream, because I have to recommend stuff to read about sharing stuff to read while reading about reading. You get the point. So instead of books this week, my 3 favorite podcasts of all time, in no particular order, 99% Invisible. There's no better example of a podcast that encourages lifelong learning. Plus, the host's voice is like ground butter. Everything that's baked in it tastes better. Podcast number 2, Stuff the British Stole. It's not just that they stole a lot and for a long time. It's that they did it intentionally in a way that they could tell a really cool story when they got back to the pub. It's the best kind of evil, entertaining. And podcast number 3, Revisionist History with Malcolm Gladwell. Like all his narratives, these stories are a little too neatly packaged, and I get why he's sharing them for a broad audience, making them digestible, and in the process, maybe oversimplifying them a bit. But honestly, who cares? It's like complaining about your popcorn having too much butter. Please. Why these 3 podcasts? For the same reason that every 3rd or 4th book I read, I force myself to pick a book I would never read. A book about the history of cancer? One of the best books I've ever read. These 3 podcasts feed your curiosity. They pick that 3rd book for you, and that's priceless. That's it for week 3. Week 3. Haven't finished the month yet, and it's, a new organization, a hopefully new you. How quickly should you start to oversee the implementation of technology solutions? It's a bit of a trick question because that expectation started 3 weeks ago, day 1, but projects were in motion long before you joined, even the ones that are kicking off after your start date. So how quickly you start to oversee really depends on your definition of the word oversee. You're still in the assessment phase. You're still learning about what the business needs, the technology landscape. You're still identifying areas where the intersection of all that learning will let you add immediate value. The word immediate and immediate value still haunts you. This is where humility should play an outsized role. You don't have answers yet. You might never have answers. Your only real value are the questions you bring based on your experience and how you ask them. Just be aware of the assumptions that the path you took that got you success, that got you here, is the same path that will get you to your next success. Beware of that. Repeat the mantra. If you're walking through the woods and you find the same tree, you're lost.